The scream that never came should have shattered every window in the pack house. Instead, Lyra bit her tongue until blood pooled in her mouth, watching in horror as her younger sister was dragged away by rogues while she remained perfectly, devastatingly silent. 8 years later, the phantom taste of copper still haunted her mornings. Lyra pressed her fingers to her throat, feeling the old scar tissue where she'd bitten through her own tongue that terrible night when everything changed. The memory never faded. 17 years old, standing in the woods behind their family cabin when the power first surged through her. One word, just one command shouted at their neighbor's aggressive dog, and the beast had dropped to its belly, whimpering in submission. That's when she understood what the old women whispered about in the corners of pack meetings. Moon-blessed. Voice of the goddess. The werewolf who could command any wolf with nothing but her words. She'd run home to tell her parents, excitement bubbling in her chest. Instead, she'd found them in hushed conversation with the pack elders. When she comes of age, she'll need to be mated immediately, Elder Thorn had been saying. The neighboring packs are already sending inquiries. A moon-blessed can't remain unclaimed. She's just a child, her mother had protested weakly. She's a weapon, Thorn replied coldly. And weapons need to be controlled. That night, Lyra had crept into the kitchen, taken her father's sharpest knife, and made a choice that would define the next 8 years of her life. The pain had been excruciating, the healing slow and imperfect, but it had worked. She'd destroyed her own gift to save her freedom. Now 25, she moved through the pack house like a ghost, collecting herbs from the garden for the day's healing work. Being mute had its advantages. People forgot she was there, spoke freely around her, never suspected she heard every whispered secret and political machination. As the pack's herbalist, she was valued but overlooked, essential but invisible. It was perfect. Until Alpha King Darius Blackthorn arrived for the annual summit. Lyra first saw him through the kitchen window as she prepared her morning teas. He stood in the courtyard surrounded by his guard, and even from a distance, his presence was overwhelming. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and the kind of commanding bearing that made other alphas step back instinctively. But it was his eyes that made her freeze, silver, like moonlight on water, and somehow familiar in a way that made her chest tight. She ducked below the windowsill, heart racing for no reason she could name. "The king's here early," her assistant Maya signed as she bustled into the kitchen. Maya had learned sign language years ago when Lyra first took over the healing duties. 2 hours before schedule. Pack leadership is scrambling. Lyra nodded, focusing on her herbs. She had no reason to interact with visiting alphas. She was the mute herbalist, beneath their notice. But throughout the day, she felt eyes on her. During the welcome ceremony, she stood at the back of the great hall with the other pack workers, hands folded, head down. The Alpha King gave his formal greetings, his voice a rich baritone that seemed to resonate in her bones. She risked one glance upward and found those silver eyes locked directly on her. Her breath caught. He looked at her like he was solving a puzzle, his gaze intense and searching. Around them, the ceremony continued, speeches about pack alliances and territorial agreements, but Lyra felt pinned in place by that stare. When she finally looked away, her hands were shaking. That evening, she was grinding valerian root in her workroom when the door opened without a knock. She looked up to find the Alpha King himself filling her doorway, still dressed in the formal black of the ceremonies but somehow less intimidating in the soft candlelight of her space. "You're the herbalist," he said. It wasn't a question. Lyra nodded, setting down her mortar and pestle. She reached for her writing tablet, the one she used to communicate with those who didn't know sign language, but his voice stopped her. "I have trouble sleeping," he continued, stepping into the room. "Travel makes it worse. I was told you might have something to help." She nodded again and moved to her shelves, selecting chamomile, lavender, and a touch of lemon balm. Her hands were steady as she measured the herbs, but she was hyper-aware of him watching her every movement. Most people looked through her. He looked at her like she mattered. When she handed him the small cloth packet of herbs, their fingers brushed. The contact sent electricity up her arm, and she jerked back so quickly she knocked over her ink bottle. Black ink spread across her work table, staining her notes. She grabbed for cloths to clean it up, mortified by her clumsiness, but he was already there, helping her, his large hands efficient as they saved what they could of her work. "Sorry," he murmured, though the spill wasn't his fault. "I should have announced myself." She shook her head, using gestures to indicate it was fine, no problem. But when she looked up to thank him with a smile, she found him studying her face with an expression she couldn't read. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She pointed to herself and then spelled it out in sign language, though she doubted he'd understand. "Lyra," he said, and her name in his voice made something flutter in her chest. Beautiful name. How had he known? Most people needed it written down. She must have looked confused because he smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him, transforming his severe features into something warmer. "My mother was deaf," he explained. "I learned to sign as a child." Of course he did. Just her luck that the one alpha she needed to avoid was the one who could understand her perfectly. "Thank you for the herbs," she signed. "They should help with the insomnia." "And thank you for not treating me like a king for 5 minutes," he replied, both speaking and signing simultaneously. "It's refreshing." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving only the scent of pine and something wild behind. That night, Lyra lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't stop thinking about silver eyes and gentle hands helping clean up spilled ink. Couldn't stop replaying the way he'd said her name, like it meant something. She was being ridiculous. He was an Alpha King, the most powerful werewolf in the Northern Territories. She was a mute herbalist who'd mutilated herself to escape her own nature. Even if he was kind to her, even if his smile made her forget to breathe, there could never be anything between them. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams she couldn't control. In them, she was 17 again, standing in the moonlight with her voice intact and power thrumming through her veins. But instead of fear, she felt hope. Instead of running, she stood her ground. And when the silver-eyed wolf appeared at the edge of the forest, she opened her mouth and called his name like a prayer. "Darius." The word slipped from her lips in the dark, barely a whisper but unmistakably clear. She jerked awake, hand flying to her throat in horror. She hadn't spoken aloud in 8 years, not once. The muscles felt strange, rusty, like a door long locked suddenly forced open. A shadow moved in her doorway. "I was checking on the pack house," came that familiar baritone, though something in his tone had changed. Sharpened. Making sure everyone was settled for the night. Lyra's blood turned to ice. He was standing there, silhouetted against the hallway light, and from his stillness she knew with devastating certainty that he'd heard her speak his name. The game was over. Her 8-year charade had just crumbled with a single word whispered in her sleep, and Alpha King Darius Blackthorn was standing in her doorway, having heard every damning syllable. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. The silence stretched between them like a blade. Lyra sat frozen in her narrow bed, sheets clutched to her chest, watching the shadow in her doorway. Darius didn't move, didn't speak, but she could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Say something," she willed him. "Demand answers. Call me out for the liar I am." Instead, he stepped back into the hallway. "Sleep well, Lyra," he said quietly, and closed her door with a soft click. She stared at the wooden barrier between them until dawn crept through her small window, certain that any moment he'd return with guards, with questions, with the truth she'd buried 8 years ago. But morning came with nothing but the usual sounds of the pack house stirring to life. Maybe he hadn't heard her after all. Maybe she'd imagined the way his voice had changed, gone sharp and knowing in the darkness. Maybe she was safe. The illusion lasted exactly 3 hours. Lyra was in the kitchen, preparing morning tonics for the elders, when the accident happened. She was reaching for a high shelf when the ladder beneath her suddenly gave way, one leg snapping with a crack like breaking bone. She tumbled backward, arms windmilling, toward the stone floor and the rack of iron hooks that would split her skull open. Strong arms caught her mid-fall. Her body slammed into a solid chest, and she found herself cradled against familiar warmth, breathing in pine and wilderness. Darius looked down at her with those silver eyes, and she realized that any normal person would have screamed during that fall. Would have cried out in fear, in surprise, in anything. She'd remained perfectly silent. "Careful," he murmured, steadying her on her feet. His hands lingered on her waist longer than necessary. Old ladders can be unpredictable. Lyra nodded her thanks and stepped away, but not before she caught the calculating look that flashed across his features. Behind him, she noticed his beta, a tall, dark-haired man called Kane, watching the interaction with keen interest. That afternoon, Kane appeared in her workroom. "The king sent me," he said without preamble, then switched to sign language. "He's concerned about the accident this morning. Wants to make sure you weren't injured." Lyra's hands moved in practiced response. "I'm fine. Thank you for asking." "You have excellent balance," Kane observed, still signing. "Most people would have cried out when they fell. I don't make unnecessary noise. Even when surprised." She kept her expression neutral. "Especially when surprised." Kane studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a predator's smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The king will be pleased to know you're unharmed." When he left, Lyra sank into her chair, hands shaking. They were testing her. She was sure of it now. But why? What could they possibly suspect? The tests continued over the next 2 days, each one more elaborate than the last. A serving tray, accidentally, dropped behind her while she worked, the crash loud enough to make half the kitchen staff jump. She didn't even flinch. A horse got loose in the courtyard while she was gathering herbs, charging straight toward her with iron-shod hooves. She simply stepped aside at the last moment, calm as still water. A pot of boiling water slipped from a maid's hands, splashing dangerously close to Lyra's feet. She moved away smoothly, without a sound. Each time, she felt those silver eyes watching from somewhere nearby. Each time, she maintained her performance with desperate determination. But inside, she was screaming. On the third night, Darius appeared in her workroom again. This time, he wasn't alone. The man behind him was clearly a prisoner, hands shackled, clothes torn, the acrid scent of rogue clinging to him like smoke. He was thin and wild-looking, with matted brown hair and eyes that darted constantly around the room. But when his gaze fell on Lyra, something shifted in his expression. Recognition. "This prisoner was caught trespassing on Pack lands," Darius said conversationally, settling into the chair across from her work table. "He claims to have information about a raid 8 years ago. Something about the Moonwood Pack." Lyra's blood turned to ice. The Moonwood Pack. Her birth pack. The one that had been slaughtered by rogues when she was 17. "Tell her what you told me," Darius commanded the prisoner. The rogue grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "I remember that night," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Remember the Alpha's house burning. Remember the screams." His eyes fixed on Lyra's face. "Remember the 2 little girls who ran into the woods." Lyra's hands clenched in her lap, but she kept her expression blank. "One of them got away," the rogue continued. "The older one. She just disappeared. Like she vanished into thin air. But we caught the younger one." His grin widened. "Pretty little thing. Cried so beautifully when we..." "Enough." Darius's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Take him back to the cells." Kane appeared as if summoned, hauling the prisoner toward the door. But the rogue wasn't finished. "You want to know what happened to the older sister?" he called over his shoulder. "She's probably dead somewhere. Or maybe..." His gaze locked with Lyra's one last time. "Maybe she's hiding in plain sight, pretending to be something she's not." The door slammed behind them. Lyra sat perfectly still, hands folded, face serene. But inside, she was crumbling. Her little sister Emma. Sweet, laughing Emma, who used to braid flowers in her hair and sneak extra honey cakes from the kitchen. The rogues had taken her. Hurt her. And Lyra had done nothing. Had said nothing. Had remained silent while her baby sister screamed. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Darius said softly. "I thought you might have known some of the Moonwood Pack survivors." She reached for her writing tablet with steady hands and wrote, "I didn't know them personally." It was technically true. She hadn't known the survivors because she was the only one. "The prisoner will be executed tomorrow," Darius continued, watching her face carefully. "For his crimes against your people." "Justice," she wrote. "Yes," he agreed. "Justice." But his eyes said he was still waiting for something. Still testing. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She paced her small room, the rogue's words echoing in her mind. Emma's face haunted her, not as she'd been in life, but as she must have looked in those final moments. Afraid. Alone. Calling for the sister who never came. Guilt and grief clawed at her throat, demanding release. She wanted to scream, to howl, to let out 8 years of swallowed anguish. Instead, she pressed her lips together and endured. At midnight, she gave up on sleep and padded barefoot to the herb garden. The night air was cool against her skin, and the moonlight turned the plants silver. She knelt among the chamomile and began weeding by touch, needing something to do with her hands. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear footsteps on the garden path. "You're thorough," came a familiar voice from the darkness. Most people would have broken by now. Lyra's hands stilled, but she didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge him. If she ignored him, maybe he'd leave. 5 years, Darius continued, moving closer. "That's how long I've been searching for my mate. 5 years of visiting every pack, meeting every eligible female, hoping to feel that spark of recognition." His boots appeared in her peripheral vision as he crouched beside her. "Do you know what that does to a wolf, Lyra? To be incomplete for so long?" She kept weeding, though her hands had begun to shake. "It makes you desperate," he said quietly. "It makes you ruthless. It makes you very, very good at reading people." A large hand covered hers, stilling her movements. "And what I read in you is fascinating," he continued. "A mute who never startles at loud noises. A woman who doesn't cry out when she falls. Someone who can watch a prisoner describe her family's murder without shedding a single tear." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "Either you're the most emotionally dead creature I've ever met, or you're the best actress in the Northern Territories." Lyra tried to pull her hand away, but his grip tightened. "I've been researching," Darius said conversationally. "Ancient texts. Old legends. Stories about wolves blessed by the moon goddess herself. Wolves who could command others with nothing but their voice." She went rigid beneath his touch. "Do you know what happened to most moon-blessed wolves throughout history, Lyra?" She remained silent, but inside she was screaming. "They were claimed young," he continued. "Mated to powerful alphas who wanted to control their gift. Used as weapons. As tools." His free hand lifted to trace the line of her jaw. "I imagine a young moon-blessed might do anything to avoid that fate. Even mutilate herself to hide what she was." Lyra's breathing had gone shallow, but she still didn't speak. "The thing is," Darius said, voice dropping to a whisper, "I can feel you in my head sometimes. Just at the edges of my consciousness. Like an echo of something that should be there." His fingers found the pulse point at her throat, pressing gently. Like a mate bond trying to form. "No." The words screamed through her mind, but her lips remained sealed. And then his voice was inside her head, bypassing her ears entirely, sliding through her mental defenses like smoke through cracks. "I know what you are, little wolf. The question is, how long will you keep lying to your king?" If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 3. The words in her mind shattered the last of Lyra's defenses like glass breaking against stone. She jerked away from his touch, scrambling backward through the herb garden until her spine hit the stone wall. Darius remained crouched where she'd left him, silver eyes gleaming in the moonlight, patient as a predator who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. No. The word tore from her throat like a rusty blade, raw and unused after 8 years of silence. Her hand flew to her mouth in horror, but it was too late. The sound hung in the air between them, undeniable proof of what she'd spent nearly a decade hiding. Darius went absolutely still. There she is, he said softly, and the satisfaction in his voice made her want to run. My mate's voice. I'm not your mate. The words came easier now, though her throat burned with the effort. I'm not anyone's mate. I won't be claimed like some prize to be won. He rose slowly, hands spread in a gesture meant to be calming, but she could see the predatory tension in every line of his body. Lyra. Don't. She pushed herself upright, using the wall for support. 8 years of silence had made her legs weak with the effort of speaking. You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I'm moon-blessed. Yes, I mutilated myself to hide it. And yes, I'd do it again. His face went carefully blank. Why? A bitter laugh escaped her. Because I've watched what happens to powerful she-wolves, Your Majesty. I've seen them reduced to breeding stock, political pawns, pretty ornaments to hang on an alpha's arm. She took a shaking breath. I've seen what happens to Moonblessed specifically. The histories you've been reading? They don't tell the whole story. They don't mention how we're locked away, how our voices are stolen from us in different ways, how we become tools instead of people. That wouldn't happen with me. Wouldn't it? She stepped away from the wall, anger giving her strength. You're the Alpha King. You rule through fear and power. What use would you have for a mate who couldn't be controlled? You think I want to control you? I think you want to possess me. The words came out fierce, 8 years of suppressed rage finally finding voice. I think you felt the mate bond pulling at you and decided you'd found your perfect weapon. The moon-blessed Luna Queen, commanded to use her voice only for your benefit. Pain flashed across his features. Is that really what you think of me? For a moment, looking at the hurt in his silver eyes, she almost wavered. Almost believed that maybe, possibly, he could be different. Then she remembered her sister's screams, her parents burning home, the way the pack elders had discussed her future like she was livestock. I think you're a king, she said quietly. And kings take what they want, consequences be damned. Lyra. No. She shook her head, tears threatening. I won't be your Luna. I won't be anyone's Luna. I'd rather die free than live as your claimed prize. The words hung between them like a thrown gauntlet. Darius stared at her, and she could see him processing her rejection, her revelation, the mate bond that sang between them despite her desperate denial. His face went through a dozen emotions, shock, hurt, anger, something that might have been grief. When he opened his mouth to respond, the attack came. They poured over the garden walls like shadows made flesh, rogues, at least 20 of them, moving with coordinated precision that spoke of careful planning. Lyra had time for one shocked breath before they were surrounded. Well, came a voice from the darkness that made her blood freeze. My little niece, finally found at last. A figure stepped into the moonlight, and Lyra's world tilted sideways. Uncle Marcus? He looked older than she remembered, scarred and weathered by 8 years in exile, but it was unmistakably him. Her father's brother, who'd supposedly died in the same attack that claimed her parents. Who she'd mourned alongside everyone else. Hello, little wolf, Marcus said, smiling the same warm smile that had fooled her for the first 17 years of her life. You've grown beautiful. And so very clever, hiding in plain sight all these years. Darius moved in front of her, a growl rumbling in his chest. Marcus Ashwood. You're supposed to be dead. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Marcus replied pleasantly. Though I must say, playing dead has its advantages. Amazing what people say when they think you're not listening. You planned this. The pieces were falling into place in Lyra's mind, each one more horrifying than the last. The rogue attacks on my birth pack, you orchestrated them. Guilty as charged. Marcus's smile turned predatory. Though I prefer to think of it as strategic repositioning. Your parents were so stubborn about your future, you see. Thought they could hide what you were, keep you safe from the political machinations of pack life. He laughed, the sound bitter. They never understood that power like yours can't be hidden forever. It needs to be used. You killed them. Fury built in her chest, hot and desperate. You killed Emma. I killed obstacles, Marcus corrected. And Emma, well, sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. The casual way he dismissed her sister's murder sent rage coursing through Lyra's veins. Power stirred in her chest, awakening after 8 years of forced dormancy, and she felt her control slipping. The thing about moon-blessed wolves, Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to the dangerous energy building around his niece, is that their power grows stronger under stress. Trauma, fear, desperation. These things crack the careful walls we build around our abilities. His eyes gleamed. I've been waiting years for you to manifest fully. Waiting for the right pressure to break you open. Darius snarled, muscles coiling to spring, but Marcus raised a hand. I wouldn't, Your Majesty. You see, I haven't been idle these past 8 years. I've been building networks, placing assets, gathering information. His smile turned vicious. Including placing someone very close to you indeed. A figure stepped out from behind Darius, and Lyra's heart stopped. Cain. The beta she'd trusted, who'd questioned her so carefully, who'd been present for every test, every accident. Surprise, Cain said mildly, silver blade already sliding between Darius's ribs before the king could react. Darius roared, spinning to face his betrayer, but the poisoned blade had already done its work. He staggered, silver eyes dulling as the toxin spread through his system. Wolfsbane and iron, Cain explained conversationally. Nasty combination. Won't kill you, but it'll keep you nice and weak for what comes next. The rogues closed in, and Lyra felt the last of her control snap. Stop. The command tore from her throat with 8 years of suppressed power behind it, hitting every wolf in the garden like a physical blow. The rogues froze mid-attack. Cain's hand stopped inches from delivering another strike to Darius. Even Marcus swayed on his feet. But the command was too strong, too desperate, too uncontrolled. Half of Darius's own pack, drawn by the sounds of battle, had arrived just as she screamed. The moon-blessed power slammed into them without discrimination, friend and foe alike, and she watched in horror as loyal pack wolves turned confused, glassy-eyed gazes toward their fallen king. Kill him, she heard herself say, the words pulled from her lips by power she couldn't contain. Kill the Alpha. No. She clapped her hands over her mouth, but it was too late. The pack wolves moved forward like sleepwalkers, their own beta among them, all of them compelled by her voice to commit regicide. Magnificent, Marcus breathed. Even better than I hoped. Darius, poisoned and surrounded by his own people turned against him, looked at her with something that might have been understanding. Run, he managed, voice rough with pain and betrayal. She didn't need to be told twice. Lyra turned and fled into the wilderness, her uncle's laughter following her into the darkness. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of battle resuming, but she couldn't tell who was fighting whom anymore. Her power had turned everything to chaos. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, finally collapsing beside a stream miles from the pack house. In the distance, she could still hear the faint sounds of fighting. What had she done? She'd spent 8 years carefully controlling her gift, and in one moment of panic, she destroyed everything. Made Darius's own people turn against him. Proven every fear he might have had about what she was capable of. She was a weapon. A monster. Everything she tried so hard not to become. Behind her, a twig snapped. "There you are," Cain said, stepping into the moonlight. Blood stained his clothes, but he looked uninjured. Satisfied. "Quite a show back there. Your uncle will be pleased." Lyra scrambled to her feet, but there was nowhere to run. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, her power spent. "You're going to come with me now," Cain continued pleasantly. "Willingly or not, it makes no difference. Marcus has plans for you, and they don't require your cooperation." "What about Darius?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Cain's smile turned cruel. "What about him? You commanded his own pack to kill him, sweetheart. I'd say that makes you a Kingslayer." He stepped closer. "Though between you and me, Marcus had contingency plans. The king might survive the night, but he'll never trust you again. Not after what you did." The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. Even if Darius lived, even if the poison didn't kill him, she'd proven exactly what kind of monster she was. She'd used her power against innocent people. Made them weapons against their own alpha. She'd become everything she tried to avoid. "Now then," Cain said, producing silver shackles from his jacket. "Let's go home, shall we? Your uncle has been planning this reunion for 8 long years." As he moved toward her, Lyra heard Marcus's voice drift through the forest, carried on the night wind as he spoke to his rogue allies. "Phase 1 is complete. The Moonblessed has manifested, and she's isolated from any potential allies. The king's pack is in chaos, leaderless and confused." His laughter sent chills down her spine. "Soon, very soon, we'll have the most powerful weapon in the Northern Territories under our control. And then we take everything." If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 4. 3 days. Lyra had managed to evade Cain and the rogues for 3 days, living on stream water and the few edible berries she could find, pushing deeper into the wilderness with each passing hour. Her throat was raw from disuse. After breaking her silence so violently in the garden, she'd returned to muteness, afraid of what might spill from her lips if she opened them again. But exhaustion and hunger were taking their toll. Her movements had grown sluggish, her reflexes dulled by fatigue and grief. When the net dropped from the trees above, she barely managed a startled gasp before the silver thread sent agony racing through her system. She woke bound to a chair in what looked like an abandoned mining camp, wrists shackled with silver that burned against her skin. The scent of old death and newer violence clung to the wooden buildings, and she could hear the sounds of a large group moving through the surrounding forest. Marcus sat across from her, looking far too pleased with himself. "Welcome to my humble headquarters," he said, spreading his arms wide. "Not as grand as the royal pack house, I'm sure, but it serves our purposes." Lyra tested her bonds without looking down, but the silver held firm. She kept her expression carefully blank, falling back on the mask she'd worn for 8 years. "Oh, don't start that again," Marcus said with fond exasperation. "We're past pretending now, little wolf. I heard you speak in that garden. Heard you command half the king's pack to turn on their alpha." His eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Magnificent work, by the way. Even I didn't expect you to manifest quite so dramatically." She remained silent, but Marcus seemed content to fill the quiet himself. "Do you want to know why I really killed your parents?" he asked conversationally, settling back in his chair. "The official story I told my rogues is that your father was weak, that he stood in the way of progress. But the truth?" He leaned forward, silver eyes, so much like Darius's, she realized with a chill, fixed on her face. "The truth is that your father discovered my plans. Plans to use you, his precious daughter, to reshape the werewolf world." Flashback. "You want me to do what?" Thomas Ashwood's voice carried clearly through the cabin walls, and 17-year-old Lyra pressed closer to the window, heart hammering. Think about it, brother. Marcus's voice was smooth, persuasive. She's moon-blessed. Do you understand what that means? What we could accomplish? What you could accomplish, you mean? Thomas's tone had gone cold. She's my daughter, Marcus. Not a weapon. She's both. And she's wasting away here, playing at being normal when she could be changing history. A pause. The pack alphas are growing soft, brother. Complacent. They've forgotten what it means to be wolves. But with Lyra's voice, we could remind them. We could unite the packs under proper leadership. Under your leadership. Under strong leadership. The kind that doesn't bend to human politics and territorial disputes. The kind that remembers we are predators, not pets. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with something that might have been grief. Get out. Brother. I said get out. And if you come near my daughter again, if you try to use her for your revolution, I'll kill you myself. Marcus's laughter was soft and dangerous. You always were too sentimental, Thomas. But you'll change your mind. When you see what's coming, when you realize the humans will never accept us as equals, you'll understand what needs to be done. Never. We'll see. Present. He never did change his mind, Marcus continued, drawing Lyra back to the present. Right up until the end, he refused to see reason. Even when I explained that the humans were developing new weapons, new ways to hunt us. Even when I showed him the government files about werewolf containment protocols. Lyra's eyes widened despite herself. Government files? Marcus caught her expression and smiled. Oh yes, little wolf. The humans know about us. Have for decades. They're just waiting for the right moment to act. But with a moon blessed at our disposal. He shrugged. Well, let's just say the playing field would be considerably more level. So you killed them, Lyra said quietly, the words scraping past her damaged throat. Your own brother. Your own family. I eliminated obstacles, Marcus corrected. And unfortunately, that included sweet little Emma. She saw too much that night, screamed too loudly. The rogues got carried away. Rage built in Lyra's chest, hot and demanding, but she forced it down. She couldn't lose control again. Couldn't let the power loose when she didn't know who else might be caught in its wake. Where's Darius? She asked instead. Ah yes, your rejected mate. Marcus's smile turned cruel. Alive, as far as I know. Though considerably diminished. Amazing what a little poison and betrayal can do to even the strongest alpha. What do you mean? I mean that trust, once broken, is very hard to rebuild. And thanks to your little display in the garden, the Alpha King now knows exactly how dangerous you are. How little control you have over that pretty voice of yours. Marcus leaned forward. Tell me, little wolf, do you think he'll still want you after you commanded his own people to kill him? The words hit like physical blows, but Lyra kept her expression steady. She couldn't let Marcus see how deep those particular wounds went. Meanwhile, Darius stood in the ruins of his pack house's great hall, silver eyes surveying the damage from 3 nights ago. Overturned furniture, bloodstains on the stone floor, claw marks in the wooden beams, all testament to the chaos that had erupted when Lyra's voice had turned his people against him. Most of his pack had recovered from the moon-blessed compulsion, confused and horrified by what they'd been forced to do. The poison had been harder to shake, leaving him weak and disoriented for 2 full days. But he was alive, and that was more than Marcus had probably hoped for. Your Majesty. Jonathan, his senior beta, approached with a tablet in his hands. We've analyzed the attack patterns. It wasn't random, they knew our patrol schedules, our defensive positions, even which windows would be unguarded. Darius nodded grimly. He'd reached the same conclusion. Inside information. Yes, sir. Someone's been feeding them intelligence for, probably months. The betrayal stung, but not as much as the memory of Silver eyes wide with horror as Lyra realized what her voice had compelled his people to do. She'd looked shattered, devastated by her own power. And then she'd run, disappearing into the wilderness like a ghost. Just like she'd been doing for 8 years. "Sir?" Jonathan was watching him with concern. "Your orders?" "Double the guard rotations. No one goes anywhere alone. And I want a full accounting of everyone who had access to sensitive information over the past year." "Already in progress, sir." "But..." Jonathan hesitated. "There's something else." Darius waited. "We found this in Beta Kane's quarters." Jonathan held up a small communication device, the kind rogues use to coordinate attacks. "He's been reporting to someone for at least 2 years." The confirmation of Kane's betrayal should have brought satisfaction. Instead, Darius felt only a bone-deep weariness. How many others had been compromised? How many of his people had been living double lives? "There's more," Jonathan continued, his voice dropping. "Personal communications." "Sir, they have his daughter." Darius went very still. "Explain." "Kane's daughter, Sarah. She disappeared 2 years ago during a routine supply run. We assumed rogues killed her, but..." Jonathan pulled up a series of messages on the device. "Marcus has been holding her hostage. Using her to force Kane's cooperation." Darius read the messages in silence, each one a knife between his ribs. Kane's desperate pleas for his daughter's safety. Marcus's cold responses, always the same, information for her continued well-being. "He never told us," Darius said finally. "Never asked for help." "Would you have?" Jonathan asked quietly. "If it meant risking Sarah's life?" The question hit home because Darius knew the answer. If Lyra were being held hostage, if her safety depended on his compliance, he would have done exactly what Kane had done. Betrayed everything he believed in to keep her alive. "Where is he now?" Darius asked. "We don't know. He disappeared the night of the attack." "But sir..." Jonathan pulled up a map on the tablet. "The communications device has a tracking function. If it's still active, we might be able to locate Marcus's base." Darius studied the blinking dot on the screen, deep in the mountain wilderness. Close enough to reach by nightfall if they pushed hard. Far enough to provide excellent defensive positions. "Prep a strike team," he ordered. "Small, fast, experienced. We leave in an hour." "Sir, with respect, you're still recovering from the poison." "Perhaps." "I'm going, Jonathan." Darius's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "They have my mate. Nothing else matters." Jonathan nodded, understanding flashing in his eyes. "Yes, sir." "But sir, what about Kane? When we find him?" Darius was quiet for a long moment, thinking of loyalty and desperation, of the impossible choices that defined leadership. "We save his daughter," he said finally. "Then we'll talk." Back at the mining camp. Lyra had lost track of time, but she estimated it was late afternoon when the screaming started. Marcus had left her alone for hours, bound to her chair in the center of what had once been the camp's main building. She could hear rogues moving around outside, setting up defenses, preparing for something. But it wasn't until the prisoners were dragged in that she understood what Marcus had planned. 5 wolves, all of them bearing the scent of Darius's pack. 2 she recognized as guards from the pack house. The others were strangers, but their terror was universal as Marcus's rogues forced them to their knees in front of her chair. "My dear niece," Marcus said, entering with theatrical flair. "I hope you've been comfortable. Now, it's time we discussed your future." Lyra kept her mouth shut, but her eyes tracked to the prisoners. One of the guards, a young male barely out of his teens, was bleeding from a head wound that needed immediate attention. "I see you've noticed our guests," Marcus continued. "Members of your rejected mate's pack, captured during their patrols. Good wolves, from what I understand. Loyal. Devoted." His smile was razor-sharp. The kind of wolves who would die before betraying their alpha. He moved behind the first prisoner, a middle-aged female with kind eyes and graying hair. "This is Elena," Marcus said conversationally. "She's been the pack house cook for 15 years. Makes excellent apple tarts, I'm told. 3 children, all grown, and 2 grandchildren who call her Nana." Without warning, his claws extended, pricking the skin at Elena's throat. She whimpered but didn't struggle. "Here's how this works," Marcus said to Lyra. "I'm going to kill them. One by one. Unless, of course, you decide to use that lovely voice of yours to save them." "No." The word tore from Lyra's throat before she could stop it. "No?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You'd rather watch innocent people die than speak? How remarkably selfish of you. I won't be your weapon. You already are my weapon, little wolf. The only question is whether you'll be a willing one." His claws pressed deeper, drawing blood. Elena's breath hitched, but she kept her eyes fixed on Lyra's face. "Don't," Elena mouthed silently. "Don't give him what he wants." Marcus caught the exchange and laughed. Such nobility. Such pointless sacrifice. He looked back at Lyra. "Save her." "I can't." "Save her." Marcus roared, his voice carrying the command of an alpha. But Lyra shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I won't. I can't control it. If I use my voice, I might hurt them myself. Then Elena dies knowing you chose your principles over her life." The claws sliced deep. Elena's death was quick, but not quiet. Her pained cry echoed through the building as she slumped forward, blood pooling beneath her body. The other prisoners flinched but didn't break. "One down," Marcus said pleasantly, moving to the second prisoner. 4 to go. The young guard was next. Thomas, according to Marcus's cheerful introduction. Barely 20, with a mate back at the pack house and dreams of becoming a pack doctor. "Please," Lyra whispered. "Please don't do this." "Then stop me," Marcus replied. "One word, little wolf. One command, and I'll spare them all." "I told you, I can't control." Thomas's scream cut through her protest as Marcus's claws found their mark. 2 down. The third prisoner was older, scarred from countless battles, but his eyes were gentle when he looked at Lyra. "Don't," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Don't let him win." Marcus killed him mid-sentence. 3 down. By the time Marcus moved to the fourth prisoner, a young mother whose daughter was waiting at home, Lyra was sobbing openly. But she held her silence, even as the woman's lifeblood joined the growing pool on the floor. 4 down. The last prisoner was the injured guard, the boy who couldn't have been more than 19. He was barely conscious, swaying on his knees, but when Marcus grabbed his hair and yanked his head back, his eyes found Lyra's. "My name is David," he said clearly, voice carrying despite his injuries. "Tell my family, tell them I died loyal." Marcus raised his claws. "Stop." The command exploded from Lyra's chest with 8 years of suppressed power and 3 days of building rage behind it. It hit every rogue in the camp like a physical blow, sending them to their knees with expressions of blank submission. But it was more than that. The power kept building, kept pouring out of her until the very air hummed with it. She felt her voice reach beyond the camp, beyond the immediate area, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. "Submit to me. All of you. Submit." Every rogue within miles dropped where they stood. Marcus himself fought the compulsion, his own alpha power warring against hers, but even he was forced to one knee. "Magnificent," he gasped, silver eyes wide with awe and triumph. "Even better than I dreamed." But Lyra barely heard him. The power surge was so intense, so vast, that it felt like her very soul was being broadcast across the mountains. She could sense other supernatural creatures responding to the call, vampires, fae, things with no names that dwelt in the deepest shadows. And something else. Something old and vast and hungry that had been sleeping beneath the mountain peaks for centuries uncounted. Something that felt the psychic beacon of her voice and began, slowly, to wake. In the distance, Marcus's rogues began to howl. Not in submission, but in terror, as something that should have remained buried stirred in the darkness beneath the earth. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The howling stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like death itself. Lyra collapsed forward in her chair, the silver bonds the only thing keeping her upright as the last of her power drained away. Her throat burned, her vision blurred, and something vital felt hollow inside her chest, as if the massive surge of moon-blessed energy had carved out pieces of her soul. Around her, Marcus's rogues remained on their knees, caught in her compulsion, but their eyes had gone wide with a fear that had nothing to do with her voice. "What have you done?" Marcus whispered, staggering to his feet. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked truly shaken. The ground beneath the mining camp began to tremble. At first, Lyra thought it was an earthquake. The mountains were known for them. But then she heard it, a sound like breathing, if breathing could shake stone and make the very air taste of ancient hunger. Something vast was stirring far below, responding to the psychic beacon she just sent screaming across the supernatural realm. "The Shadow Maw," Marcus breathed, his face going pale. "It's actually waking." "What?" Lyra's voice cracked, barely a whisper. "What is that?" Marcus laughed, but there was hysteria at the edges. "The reason your bloodline exists, little wolf. The reason the first moon blessed was created by the goddess herself." His eyes gleamed with manic satisfaction. "The primordial darkness that your ancestors sealed away centuries ago." The trembling intensified, and through the floorboards came a sound like claws scraping against stone. Something was climbing up from the deep places, drawn by the taste of her power. "You see," Marcus continued, pacing now with manic energy, "I've been researching more than just moon-blessed legends these past 8 years. I've been studying the old stories, the ones the pack historians tried to bury. Stories about why wolves like you were blessed by the goddess in the first place." Another tremor shook the building, stronger this time. Dust rained from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance, Lyra could hear screaming, not howls now, but the terrified cries of creatures fleeing something far worse than any earthly predator. "It feeds on supernatural energy," Marcus said, his voice taking on the cadence of a professor delivering a lecture. "Vampires, fae, werewolves, anything with magic in its blood. The more powerful the creature, the more sustaining the meal." His gaze fixed on Lyra with hungry intensity. "And you, my dear niece, just rang the dinner bell." The floor cracked open. Black tendrils, thick as tree trunks and writhing with their own malevolent life, pushed through the gaps between the floorboards. They moved with purpose, reaching, searching, and where they touched the bound rogues, the wolves aged decades in seconds. Hair went gray, skin wrinkled, eyes dulled. Their life force, their very essence being drained away to feed something far below. Lyra struggled against her bonds as the tendrils crept closer. The silver burned her wrists, but terror gave her strength. Whatever this thing was, she could feel its hunger like a physical weight pressing against her mind. "Don't worry," Marcus said cheerfully, stepping carefully around the reaching darkness. "I've made arrangements." "Arrangements?" "A deal, you might say. I deliver the most powerful moon blessed in centuries to its waiting maw, and in return." He spread his arms wide. "Immortality. Dominion over every werewolf pack from here to the coast. Power beyond imagining." "You're insane." The words tore from her raw throat. "That thing will kill you too." "Will it?" Marcus tilted his head. "Or will it honor our bargain? After all, it's been so very hungry, sleeping all these years. And I'm the one who's going to end its fast." A tendril brushed against Lyra's ankle, and agony shot through her entire body. Not physical pain, this was worse. She could feel her very essence being sampled, tasted, found delectable. Her wolf whimpered inside her mind, pressing close with instinctive terror. Then the wall exploded inward. Darius came through the breach like an avenging angel, silver eyes blazing with fury and something else, something that looked suspiciously like desperate relief. His strike team followed, Jonathan, 3 other wolves she recognized, and Cain. Lyra gasped. The former beta looked haggard, haunted, but when his eyes found hers, she saw nothing but regret and determination. In his arms, he carried a young girl who couldn't have been more than 16, his daughter, she realized. The hostage Marcus had used to control him. "We're here to get you out," Darius said, his voice cutting through the chaos as he assessed the situation. His gaze took in the silver bonds, the dead prisoners, the writhing darkness emerging from the floor. "What the hell is that thing?" "The Shadow Maw," Marcus answered before Lyra could respond. "The primordial darkness that your mate just awakened with her little display of power." He smiled, seemingly unconcerned by the presence of an Alpha King and armed strike team. "Magnificent timing, Your Majesty. You can watch her die." A tendril lashed toward Darius with lightning speed, but he was already moving, claws extended, slicing through the dark appendage. Where his claws made contact, the tendril recoiled with a sound like screaming wind. "Silver," Cain called out, setting his daughter safely behind an overturned table. "Silver hurts it." "Good to know," Darius replied grimly, producing silver-edged blades from his belt. "Everyone stay back. Jonathan, get Lyra free." "Cain." "I've got defensive positions," Cain finished, already moving. Whatever else he'd done, his tactical instincts remained sharp. But as Jonathan reached for Lyra's bonds, more tendrils erupted from the floor. The building shook, timbers cracking, and through the growing gaps came something that made her blood freeze. Eyes. Massive, ancient, and filled with a hunger that had been building for centuries. The Shadow Maw wasn't just some beast, it was intelligent, calculating, and it had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Moon-blessed," a voice whispered directly into her mind, "ancient and terrible. You taste of starlight and power. I have dreamed of you." "Don't listen to it," Marcus called out, dancing away from Darius's strike. "It lies. It manipulates. But our bargain is real." "Bargain?" The voice in her head laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "I made no bargain with that chattering fool. I use him as I use all pawns, until they break." A tendril wrapped around Marcus's ankle, and his confident expression shifted to confusion, then terror as he felt his life force being drained. "No," he gasped, clawing at the dark appendage. "We had a deal." "We had nothing," the Shadow Maw purred in Lyra's mind. "But you, little wolf, you could be everything." The creature's attention focused on her like a physical weight, and suddenly she could see its full form through the psychic connection. Massive beyond comprehension, a writhing mass of darkness and hunger that stretched for miles beneath the mountains. It had been feeding on the mountain's supernatural creatures for centuries, growing stronger in its prison, waiting for something powerful enough to break the ancient seals. Something like a moon-blessed wolf using her full power. "Join with me," it whispered. "Your voice, your power, channeled through my eternal form. We could rule every supernatural creature on this continent." "Never," Lyra snarled, even as Jonathan's silver blade cut through her bonds. Her wrists were raw and bleeding, but she was free. "Then you will feed me instead." The assault came from every direction at once, dozens of tendrils reaching for her, for Darius, for every living thing in the building. Cain's daughter screamed as darkness wrapped around her leg. Jonathan went down under 3 writhing appendages. Even Darius, for all his strength and speed, was being overwhelmed. They were going to die here. Unless... Lyra looked at Darius, fighting desperately against odds that were growing worse by the second, and made a choice that terrified her more than the ancient evil they faced. She opened her mind to him completely. The mate bond that she'd denied, that he'd tried to force, suddenly blazed to life between them. Not the compulsion she'd feared, but a partnership, his tactical brilliance flowing into her consciousness while her supernatural awareness flooded into his. "Now," she said, not with her voice but with her mind. "Together." "Shadowmaw," she commanded, her voice ringing with power but controlled now, focused by Darius's strategic mind. "Release them." The tendrils holding Cain's daughter loosened slightly. "Retreat," Darius roared, his alpha authority amplified by her moon-blessed gift, the sound carrying supernatural weight. Some of the smaller appendages withdrew. But it wasn't enough. The creature was too old, too powerful. It had been feeding on supernatural energy for centuries, and her voice alone couldn't match that accumulated strength. "You need more power," the Shadowmaw taunted. "More than one little wolf can provide." "Then we'll give you more," Darius said grimly. Before she could ask what he meant, she felt it, other minds touching theirs through the mate bond. Jonathan, struggling to his feet. Cain, blood streaming from a dozen cuts. Even Cain's daughter, young but brave, her small hand finding her father's. The pack bond. Not just between her and Darius, but between all of them. A network of shared strength, shared purpose. "Shadowmaw," Lyra commanded, her voice now carrying the combined will of every wolf in the building. "By the authority of the moon goddess who sealed you, I command you to return to your prison." The creature recoiled as if struck, its tendrils writhing in pain. "Impossible," it snarled. "The seals were broken. I am free." The seals were cracked, Darius corrected, understanding flowing between him and Lyra through their bond. "Not broken. And a moon-blessed can repair what her ancestors created." But as Lyra reached for the power needed to rebuild the ancient prison, she felt something inside her chest crack. The effort was too much, too vast. Using this much moon-blessed energy would burn out her abilities completely. She would survive, but she would never again be able to command with her voice. She would be ordinary. Human. "Choose quickly," the Shadowmaw hissed, sensing her hesitation. "Power or love? You cannot have both." She looked at Darius, silver eyes wide with understanding and something that might have been grief. He knew what this would cost her. Knew she was choosing between the gift that made her unique and the life they could build together. "Do it," he said quietly. "I'll love you ordinary or extraordinary." The words broke something loose in her chest, not power this time, but fear. All these years, she'd been terrified of being claimed for what she was. But Darius wasn't asking her to be his weapon. He was asking her to be his partner. His equal. His mate. "Mark me," she said suddenly. "Before I lose the power. I need you to know that I choose this." "Choose you." His eyes went wide. "Lyra. Mark me, Darius. Please." His canines extended, and he bit down gently on the junction of her neck and shoulder. The mate bond exploded between them, complete and unbreakable, just as she reached for every scrap of moon-blessed power she possessed. "Shadowmaw," she commanded, and this time her voice carried the weight of every moon-blessed who had come before, every sacrifice made to keep the darkness at bay. "Return to the deep places. Sleep until the stars fall and the moon dies. By my voice, by my blood, by the bond one share with my chosen mate, return." The creature's scream shook the mountains. Darkness imploded, tendrils whipping back through the cracks in the floor as the Shadowmaw was dragged down, back to the prison that had held it for centuries. The ancient seals rebuilt themselves with her voice as the template, stronger now, reinforced by the mate bond that connected her to Darius and through him to every wolf who had chosen to stand with them. The silence that followed was absolute. Lyra collapsed into Darius's arms, her throat raw, her voice barely a whisper. But when she tried to use her power, tried to command even the smallest response from the wolves around her, nothing happened. The moon-blessed gift was gone. She was ordinary now. Human. Just a woman who happened to shift into a wolf. And she had never been happier. "It's over," she whispered, her voice hoarse but clear. "No power behind it now, just the simple human emotion of a woman who had found her place in the world. Marcus lay crumpled in the corner, aged rapidly by the shadow moths feeding but still alive. Kane's daughter clung to her father, both of them whole and safe. Jonathan was helping the other strike team members to their feet, wounds already healing with werewolf resilience. They had won. So, Darius said, settling her more comfortably against his chest. What happens now? Lyra considered this, testing her voice, marveling at how normal it felt to speak without power crackling behind the words. Now, she said, surprising herself by laughing, I suppose you're stuck with a very ordinary mate who's going to argue with you about everything. Everything? He raised an eyebrow. Especially, she said, grinning up at him with a freedom she'd never felt before, wedding preparations. I have very strong opinions about flowers, and I'm not afraid to use them. His laughter joined hers, rich and warm and completely unafraid. And as Kane rolled his eyes and Jonathan started coordinating their exit from the ruined mining camp, Lyra discovered that being ordinary with someone extraordinary might just be the greatest gift the moon goddess had ever given her. After all, true strength had never been about commanding others. It was about choosing to be vulnerable with the right person. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.